Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fine Print. After a long break, we're back with our AP review episodes. These are the AP Government and Politics review episodes. So without further ado, let's get started with Unit 2. We won't be covering Unit 1 since that was covered in APUSH as well. Today, we're breaking down how the US government works, starting with Congress, which is bicameral, meaning it has two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate has 100 members who serve 6-year terms, and the House has 435 members who serve 2-year terms, with the number of representatives being reapportioned after each census. Congress has several major duties, such as making laws, representing constituents, overseeing the activities of the executive branch to make sure money is spent properly and that laws are enforced, approving all treaties, and handling impeachment, where the House acts like a grand jury and the Senate conducts the actual trial. But Congress also has limits. It cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus, except in wartime. It cannot pass ex post facto laws that punish someone for an act committed before it became illegal. It cannot pass bills of attainder that punish people without a trial. It cannot tax exports. It cannot grant titles of nobility, and it must treat all states equally. Congress must also approve all presidential expenditures through laws. Elections for Congress happen in November of even numbered years, and midterm or off year elections take place in non presidential years. Every 2 years, all the House seats and 1/3 of the Senate are up for election. Senators serve 6-year terms and must be at least 30 years old, have been U.S. citizens for 9 years, and live in the state they represent. There are 100 senators, and the head of the Senate decides committee members and the order in which bills are debated. The Senate also has its own special powers. It approves all treaties, approves all presidential appointments, chooses the vice president in the event of an electoral college tie, and acts as the jury during impeachment trials. Members of Congress also have certain privileges. They cannot be sued for things they say while performing their duties, and they cannot be arrested for minor crimes while Congress is in session. Two major Supreme Court cases shaped how congressional districts are drawn. In Baker v. Carr, Tennessee hadn't redrawn its districts in 60 years, which meant rural areas had more representation than the fast-growing urban areas. The court ruled that this was a justiciable issue, meaning that the court could intervene, and it established the one-person, one-vote doctrine. In Shaw v. Reno, North Carolina had drawn two strangely shaped majority black districts. Shaw argued that the Equal Protection Clause was violated because the districts were drawn based on race, while Reno argued that favoring black voters was compensating for discrimination. The court ended up ruling that race-based districts would set a dangerous precedent and thus were unconstitutional. Moving on to the executive branch, the president must be at least 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. Presidents serve 4-year terms, can only be elected twice under the 22nd Amendment, and presidential succession is handled by the 25th Amendment. Article 2 created the presidency as a single executive, and the president serves as the commander-in-chief, appoints judges, makes treaties, approves or vetoes laws, sends and receives diplomats, and must faithfully execute the nation's laws. The president has enumerated powers, like carrying out all federal laws regardless of personal opinion. And because many laws are written broadly, presidents often issue signing statements, usually used to undo previous presidents' orders. The president also has implied powers, such as issuing executive orders, which have the force of law even though the Constitution doesn't explicitly mention them. The president appoints heads of executive agencies, diplomats, ambassadors, cabinet members, federal judges, and military officers, but the Senate must approve these appointments with a majority vote. There is a tradition called senatorial courtesy, where the Senate will only approve appointments for state-level positions if the nominee is supported by the senator from the president's party. The president can remove executive officials, but generally cannot remove federal judges and can usually only remove people he originally appointed. In foreign affairs, the president represents the United States, negotiates treaties, but although the Senate must approve them with a 2/3 vote, can make executive agreements with other nations' leaders. Treaties carry the same legal standing as acts of Congress. When it comes to war, Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the president can send federal troops to another country for 60 days, but must get congressional approval to continue beyond that. The president can recommend laws, propose legislation in the State of the Union address, and propose a national budget plan. After Congress passes a bill, the president has 10 days to act. He can sign it into law, let it become law without a signature, veto it, or use a pocket veto if Congress adjourns before the 10 days are up. Presidents may also issue signing statements to outline their interpretation of laws. Judicially, the president can grant reprieves, which postpone a sentence, and pardons, which can forgive a crime, except in cases of impeachment. The president is supported by the cabinet, and public opinion plays a huge role in presidential power. Approval ratings from polls like Gallup measure how citizens feel, and a president's ability to persuade depends on things like the honeymoon period during the first 6 months, the economy, crises, or scandals. A lot of presidential power comes from persuasion rather than commanding, the visibility of a single strong leader, national emergencies, and the bully pulpit, where the president can speak directly to the media and the public to influence them. It's a myth that the president is all-powerful, because policymakers, competing power centers, and the system of checks and balances all shape decisions. The road to the White House goes through the Electoral College. The vice presidency exists partly because vice presidents often become the accidental presidents if the president dies or resigns. Vice presidents are often chosen to balance or appease certain constituencies. If the president becomes disabled, the vice president temporarily takes over. Even the First Lady often plays a role in policymaking and advising the president. Bureaucrats are policymakers who carry out and regulate laws. The Pendleton Act created a civil service system based on merit, and today about 90% of federal employees are career civil servants whom the president cannot hire or fire. These experts work in places like NASA and carry out tasks such as implementing and regulating policy. The bureaucracy includes cabinet departments led by secretaries, independent agencies like NASA, the EPA, and the FBI, independent regulatory boards like the Federal Reserve and the FCC, and government corporations like USPS and Amtrak. Bureaucratic agencies have discretionary authority to make judgments when implementing laws and rule-making authority to create regulations that carry the force of law. They write and enforce regulations, issue fines, and interact with Congress. Iron triangles describe the strong relationships between Congress, interest groups, and bureaucratic agencies, while issue networks form to weaken those relationships. The president checks bureaucratic power through appointments, the budget, and executive orders. Congress checks the bureaucracy through hearings, oversight, rewriting legislation, confirming appointments, and controlling funding. The judicial branch checks bureaucracy through judicial review. Discretionary authority gives agencies room to interpret laws, and rulemaking authority lets them create regulations. Moving into the courts, the U.S. uses an adversarial system where courts settle civil disputes between private parties and the government, or different levels of government. Each side represents a position. The court applies the law, and a decision is made. Courts also handle criminal trials, where people accused of crime face witnesses, evidence, and a judge or jury. Accused people have the right to a public trial and a lawyer, and if they cannot afford one, the court appoints one, something that was solidified by Gideon v. Wainwright. Accused individuals are innocent until proven guilty and can request case reviews. The goal of the American legal system is ultimately equal justice under law, though it is hard to achieve because people have different resources and humans are inherently biased. The legislative and executive branches can check the court by appointing judges, impeaching and removing justices, and approving appointments. The courts also cannot strike down laws that come to it only through appellate jurisdiction. And there's always the debate between judicial activism and judicial restraint. This U.S. court system includes district courts, appeal courts, and the Supreme Court. District courts are where trials are held and lawsuits begin. Every state has at least one, and they have original jurisdiction over federal cases. These are the only federal courts that use juries and hear witness testimony. People who lose in a district court can appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which have appellate jurisdiction and cover 12 circuits, with a 13th court that has a nationwide jurisdiction. Appeals courts don't hold trials. Panels of judges review cases and can uphold, reverse, or remand them back to lower courts. At the top is the U.S. Supreme Court, whose justices serve lifetime appointments. The President appoints these justices, the Senate confirms them, and their decisions are influenced by the Justice Department, the ABA, interest groups, and other justices. The Supreme Court decides cases involving the Constitution, acts of Congress, and treaties. It has final authority and determines constitutionality through judicial review, and its rulings must be followed by the legislative and executive branches. The principles of judicial review say that the Constitution is the supreme law. The Constitution is above ordinary laws, and the judicial branch must uphold it by nullifying conflicting laws. But the Supreme Court's power has limits. It depends on the executive and state or local officials to enforce decisions. Congress can rewrite unconstitutional laws, and Congress can amend the Constitution. Fiscal policy covers how the government taxes and spends. People generally want more spending on programs, lower taxes, and a balanced budget, something last achieved during the Clinton administration. The government expenditures include the military, healthcare, and social security. A budget deficit happens when the government spending is higher than tax revenue, and a surplus happens when revenue is higher than spending. The national debt is the sum of all past deficits minus surpluses. Mandatory spending covers programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, while discretionary spending changes each year and covers things like defense and education. Government revenue comes from personal income taxes, which the 16th Amendment authorizes, and progressive taxation increases rates as income increases. Revenue also comes from corporate taxes, social insurance taxes for Social Security and Medicare, and borrowing through selling bonds. The budget process involves interest groups pushing for more funding, bureaucratic agencies requesting budgets, and the Office of Management and Budget preparing the President's budget proposal. The President proposes the budget to Congress, tax committees evaluate it, and the Congressional Budget Office reviews these budgetary requests. Committees then decide who gets what, and Congress ultimately approves these taxes and appropriations. The Government Accountability Office then audits and monitors how money is spent through the bureaucracy.